Um, hey, I get the transition. We're in the second to last week of our series talking about finding your first, or if you found your first, whatever number you want it to be, but person of peace. And what are the habits of somebody who finds persons of peace? And I'm going to do a quick review and then share the next one. And then I'm not going to do the teaching today. I've got two different guys that are going to share a little bit today who are amazing at this. But we've said if you've missed some weeks, or you just need to be reminded, because these, I think, all build on each other. First one we just said is, if you're finding persons of peace, you have the habit of praying expectantly and specifically. And we talked about a couple weeks ago, are you praying, God, would you enable me and the people that are on your team, enable them to find persons of peace, disciple them to Jesus, baptize them, get out of the way, and then baptize others. And so I'm hoping, hey, that becomes not just something we talked about a couple of weeks ago, but that's a daily prayer for you and for others. And I found people that see that happen are people usually that are praying for God to do that. And right? That's week one. I had people write down, well, how would you feel if that happened? And so, and people were through the roof. That's the goal. So anyways, that's the first. And then we said, hey, second habit is just being prepared, being ready. And we talked about being ready with how are you going to pray for people? If you thought through that, this was prayer walking yesterday, and I'm still been challenged by Susie as she shared at the end of praying, pray or ask, do you feel any differently? And I was praying for this older guy named Chuck yesterday that has a back surgery. And I coming up, and I said, I prayed that the surgery wouldn't have to happen. He'd be healed. And at the end of it, Chuck, how do you feel? And he said, Jim, I feel really good. And I said, well, can I have your phone number so we can keep updated on this? I'll keep praying. And anyways, that's not a question I'd asked before. So are you ready to pray, and know how that's going to happen? And we talked about, are you ready to share your testimony and able to do that in a really quick way? Are you prepared? Are you prepared? I talked about stories to share. Do you have stories ready? So that was week 2. Don't move on past that if you're not obeying that. Do you have those things in place? And then we said, hey, people that find persons of peace usually are people that are always on mission. And we talked about that last week and just said, hey, I have a mindset of wherever I go, I'm always dripping God. I'm always like live an idea of Shema lifestyle. And I'm not waiting. God, do you want me to drip you in conversations? No, I'm doing that all the time. That's already something I know. And then as people respond, hey, that's signs from God that you're supposed to step in. And we also talked about this idea of just listening to God's voice and getting the habit of asking and then being quiet. So those are 3 habits so far. We have one more, and then we said this I'll share in a second. And then next week, we don't really have a plan, except we're just going to have an open mic and go, hey, what happened this past month in terms of finding persons of peace? And we're not looking for just ones where like everything happened. That would be great. We'd love to hear some of those stories of like, man, they got baptized. Man, this whole explosion happened, but also just, hey, as you've taken steps of faith in the things we've talked about, what's happened? And stories of people. Probably a lot of the stories next week will be, well, they're a P-pop right now. They're a potential person of peace, but here's what's happened. And we're just going to encourage one another. We found this is a breakthrough. As you find your first person of peace, then you start realizing, well, God does this, and I can't wait to see more. So that's next week. Today, we're going to talk about just the habit of consistently going among the lost. Not a thing of simply, I sometimes go, or if it fits into my schedule, I consistently, this is a priority. For me, I sure realized I was too busy to live this out as a pastor. And I had to radically change my schedule to be able to make this something that's a priority in my life. And that you're talking to a lot of people when you find persons of peace. And my one thing I'll share, and then I'll get out of the way, is, I was reading through Acts, and you just notice that Paul, as he heads into cities, a lot of bad things happen to Paul. Like, he's getting stoned and he's being left out to die, and he's people are smear campaigns against him. And usually this is what Paul's ministry. A lot of discouraging things happened, but from that, a couple really powerful things happened. And then he'd leave the city. But from those, a couple really powerful things, those would turn into lots of multiplication of ministry. And just to encourage us as we're seeking to find persons of peace, it's oftentimes, if it's true for Paul, it's probably true for us. lots of discouraging things may happen, but from that, a couple really powerful positive things happen. And over time, that turns into really powerful and a lot more ministry, which is different than at least how I used to think of like instant gratification ministry, like do it, something happens. So the first person who's going to share with us today is a good friend of mine, Jim Thurber, and he's shared it here before, and he's been a mentor in my life and a partner in ministry. He got called from our city to go to the East Coast because the East Coast, I think, needed him. And Jim is the most consistent person I know in terms of going among the lost, and has challenged me so much in this. And so I asked Jim just to share a little bit, and then I'll introduce the next person after Jim. But so Jim, hey, take it away, man.
Thank you, Jim. And as I've said before, it's an honor to be among all of you because you're dedicated to making disciples who make disciples. We're all learning together and moving forward, and it's just a privilege to be here. Well, the day may come for you, as it has for me, and Jim was alluding to this, when disciples like you and me want to give up. And there can be many reasons for that. Could be fear, could be busy schedule, could be lack of fruit. And that's the one that hits me. As Jim just said, my wife and I moved from Southern California here to the East Coast. It's not even been 10 months yet. And I have consistently performed what the Lord has asked me to do, prayer walking, or what I call story strolling, going out and telling Bible stories. There's very little fruit. I can't say that I've been discouraged, but I have been disappointed because lack of fruit becomes a demotivator. It can cut deeply into our perseverance. Last week, Jim invited all of us to take 3 minutes and listen to the Lord. I wasn't into that 10 seconds. And this impression came on me, 3 things. 1, wait. 2, be patient. 3, be faithful. In other words, Jim, God was saying to me, persevere. Well, a passage that is very meaningful to me is 1 Corinthians chapter 3, where Paul said, I planted, Apollos watered, but God gave the increase. We don't want to stop there, though, because the next sentence says, neither the one who plants is anything, nor he who waters is anything, but God who gives the increase. God guarantees fruit if we do our part, plant and water. I was raised on a farm. The year was only successful if there was fruit. So we worked hard from late spring to plow, to stone boat, to plant, cultivate, de-weed, all with the hopes that there would be a harvest. And if there was, the year was successful. If there wasn't a harvest, for whatever reason, that year was not successful. This is what's great about Christianity. God promises a harvest. Now he will determine the time and how it's accomplished. But that's a motivator for me. This passage reassures me there will be a harvest. It just may not be today. So I have 7 motivators that encourage me and help me to stay on task. To prayer walk, to story stroll, to facilitate discovery Bible studies, disciple-making communities, and then hopefully multiplicative churches. Number 1 is joy. And as soon as I say joy, I think of Jesus Christ. Because in Hebrews, it says, for the joy set before him, Jesus endured the cross. For the joy set before him, endured the cross, despising the shame, has sat down at the right hand of the Father. Let us consider him who endured such hostility against himself, that we may not grow weary or give up. Jesus is our model. And I have a little motto for myself that I've used again and again and again. Go out with fear, come back with joy. It happened to me again yesterday. I went out, I prayed with a guy, I told a story to a guy, and on the way home, driving in the car, I had the joy of the Lord. I had planted, I had watered, now I wait for God to bring the increase. But that filled my soul with joy. Number 2, promise. Now, God promises to bring a harvest sooner or later. We might be in heaven when it occurs. But I'm talking about my promise. It's like Jim has said, get intentional. Even get intentional with the unintentionality. That's what he means by dripping God wherever we are. So for 14 years now, I have faithfully been dripping God, shall I say. God impressed upon me that this is something I must do. So I've made a promise to God that I will tell a story and pray with people on the average of one a day for an entire year. When I first started out 14 years ago, it was one a week, then it was two a week. Now it's one a day on the average. And praise God, he's enabled me over the past 5 years to surpass that goal of 364 a year. But it's a promise I made. And I know that in the scriptures, when you make a promise to God, you better get really serious about fulfilling it. The penalties can be severe otherwise. I remember when I graduated from high school, went away to college, I made a promise to myself that I would not date until my senior year so I could concentrate on my studies. I failed. The very first day in registration line, I saw this girl. Within 2 months, I was dating her, and I've now been married to her for 54 years. I broke the promise to myself, thankfully not to God. You make a promise to God, which I have done, that's a motivator, a real strong impulse to get out there and accomplish what I promised to the Lord. Number 3, and this is a 25-cent term. Basically, it's oppose Satan. I say anti-diabolicalism. 2 Corinthians chapter 4 tells me that Satan has a dream, and his dream is to trash God's kingdom and trash God's reputation. I want to be a frontline soldier. I want to be in the trench. I want to be on the front line. I want to do what Jesus did. He went out there and he embattled the enemy by telling stories and performing miracles and other things that do as well, but primarily by telling stories. I want to go up against the enemy. I want to use my sword. I want to go proclaim and make disciples, proclaim, telling stories like Jesus did when he was here. Number 4, as Jim just referenced, I'm looking for a person of peace. I understand what happens when a person of peace appears. I've actually experienced it. It's another whole story. It goes back decades. I ran into a person of peace, didn't even know that this person was that individual. But wow, the fruit that came immediately. So I'm still looking for persons of peace. And from that, hopefully, Discovery Bible studies and disciple-making communities and multiplicative churches, and the whole culture is transformed. That's another motivation. Number 5, rewards. Yep, I want to be rewarded, just like it says here, 1 Corinthians 3, 2 Corinthians chapter 5, 1 Peter chapter 2, the epistle 2 Peter. In fact, 26 of the 27 books of the New Testament tell you and me, urge you and me to be prepared for the day we have to give an evaluation to Jesus Christ. We're going to stand in front of him, and I want him smiling broadly. I remember when I was growing up, the smiles that would appear on my dad's face and my mother's face when I merited a commendation from them. That's what I want to experience from Jesus Christ. I want to give him joy. As it says in Revelation chapter 4, I want to present to him a pile of rewards to show my appreciation to him. Number 6, number 1 was joy, going out. Number 2 was me keeping a promise, being intentional. Number 3 was opposing Satan directly. Number 4, looking for a person of peace. Number 5, rewards. And number 6, saturation. I want to saturate my geographical area right here where I am on the East Coast. I want to saturate it with God's truth. I want to make God look good in the minds and hearts of people, more and more people. That's why I told the story yesterday afternoon. And I want to focus on stories from the Bible that feature God and make God look good. One of my favorites is Cain and Abel. We tell that story about Cain and Abel, and we want to focus on Cain because he blew it. His offering was inferior, got angry, killed his brother. But I like to focus on God. What do we learn about God in that story? Oh my goodness, he comes to Cain. He asks him questions. He gave him advice, and then he warned him. So I asked the person, what do we learn about God from this story? See, I'm infatuated with Habakkuk chapter 2, verse 14, where God, through his prophet, issues his dream. The earth will be filled with the knowledge of the glory of God. Glory means weight, or refers to someone's reputation, making somebody heavy in somebody else's mind. This statement appears 3 times in the Old Testament. Of course, the question is, as the waters cover the sea, what's the percentage of water that covers the sea? Well, some people will come back and tell me 70%, but that's answering the wrong question. It's not how much water covers land surface, it's how much water covers sea. And the answer, of course, is 100%. That's God's dream. He wants everybody right here where I live on the East Coast, in fact, everybody on the earth, worshiping, adoring, obeying, and living with him forever. And I know, having engaged so many people over these last 14 years, that people's concept of God tends to be faulty. It's skewed. So I want to tell stories that make God look good. Well, the last motivation for perseverance is the one that grabs me the most. As you look through the list, it would be interesting if we had time for some of you to share, what is it that drives you? Well, what I'm going to tell you next is my primary motivation for being faithful. I'm going to introduce it by telling you a story. Several months ago, I went down to a strip mall that's about 6 miles south of here. And there was a coffee wagon. And my wife loves coffee. I hate it. But I said, I'm going to get some coffee for my wife. And I went up to the coffee truck, and the attendant was all by herself. There was nobody around. I said, wow, Jim's phrase, dripping opportunity. So as the lady was preparing the coffee, I said to her, I'm a storyteller. I like to tell stories. I want to tell you a story. She says, good, I love stories. And what I do is I give categories of stories, and then I let the person pick a category, and then I tell the story. After I gave the category, she comes back to me and she says, no, I don't like those. What I want you to do is tell me your favorite story. Listen, out of about thousands of engagements, that's the only time somebody has said to me, tell me your favorite story. I said, okay, but when I tell you the story, you better be listening, because when I get to the end, I'm going to ask you, why do you think that's my favorite story? I do the same thing with all of you listening today. Here's my favorite story. One day, God said to Moses, how long will these Israelites despise me? How long will they refuse to believe in me despite all the miracles that I've done in their presence? I'm going to strike them with a deadly plague. I'm going to disown them. And then, Moses, I'm going to make you into a new and better nation, one that's greater and more powerful than the Israelites are. Wow. Moses responded. He said, what are the Egyptians? What are they going to think when they find out that you've destroyed the nation of Israel? And remember, you delivered Israel from Egypt with a great show of power, and now you're going to destroy them? God, have you thought this thing through? Don't you realize what's going to happen if you destroy the nation of Israel? The Egyptians will tell everybody what a terrible God you are. And what is it that everybody knows about you? Everybody in the region, they know you live among the Israelites. You communicate with them directly. Your cloud stands over them to protect them. You lead them with a pillar of cloud by day and a pillar of fire by night. If you destroy the nation of Israel in one strike, then all the nations who have heard of your fame will say, do you know why that God of Israel destroyed the Israelites in the desert? It's because he's so weak. He's too weak to keep his promise. He's too weak to bring them into the land that he promised to give them. That's why he destroyed them out in the desert. And that finishes the story. So I ask you folks, and I know you're muted, you can't respond, but I ask you, why do you think that's my favorite story? It's my favorite story. And it's one of my primary motivating factors. Because Moses passed the test. Moses passed the test of self-aggrandizement. God was offering him the world, power, prestige, position. And Moses said, God, it's not what it's about. In other words, God could trust Moses not to steal God's fame and glory. God knew it. May I humbly say that's what I want. I want God to be able to trust me with his glory, his fame, his reputation. I want him to know that I won't steal it to build up my own kingdom. But it goes deeper. For me, the ultimate will be for me to say what Jesus said, for me to say about myself what Jesus said about himself, and for God to say about me what he said about his son, Jesus Christ. Do you remember Jesus in the Garden of Gethsemane the night before he was crucified? He's in agony. And he says, he prays, now my soul is deeply distressed. And what should I say? Father, deliver me from this hour? In other words, Jesus Christ understood the humiliation and the excruciating pain of death by crucifixion. He'd seen or heard about probably hundreds of Jewish men being crucified. He understood that. He says, Father, should I ask you to deliver me from this horrendous death? And he answers his own question. He says, no. It's for this purpose that I came to this hour. He understood his mission. And how does he end his statement? He says, Father, glorify your name. No, it's for this purpose I've come to this hour. Glorify your name. That is a powerful statement. Glorify means refers to reputation. Name, 2/3 of the time in the Bible, it refers to someone's reputation. Jesus is hitting this principle. He's hitting it hard. God, I'm going to go to the cross to make you look good. I'm going to go to the cross to build your reputation worldwide. That's what I want to be able to say about myself. I've lived and I will die to make God look good. Doesn't stop there. The people standing around said it thundered. And we're told in the scripture that God the Father spoke from heaven. And what did he say? You have glorified me. You're going to glorify me again. Jesus, my son, you glorified me in the past. The miracles, the teaching, the disciple making, the praying, everything you did according to my will. You glorified me. You made me look good. And Jesus, I have the confidence you're going to do it again when you go to the cross. Like Moses, I want God to be able to say about me, Jim, I'm confident. I can test you. I can test you with a lack of fruit, which I've experienced this last year. And I know you're still going to do what you do to make me famous, to build my reputation. You persevered in the past, and I have confidence, Jim, you're going to do it in the future. So my motto is make God look good, Jesus well known, and Christians well trained. And I want to do that to my last breath. So when I go out to prepare, when I go out to prayer walk or story stroll, part of the preparation, which Jim Britz alluded to earlier, is prayer. I have a prayer corps of people. I'll shoot them an email, say, hey, I'm heading out tomorrow. I'm heading out in a few hours. Pray for me. And before I go out, I wrap my wife in my arms and she prays for me. And one of my prayers is, God, do not let me mess up your reputation. It's tough. Busyness gets in the way. But like Jim said, I want to drip God everywhere. If I'm on an airplane, I'm waiting for my wife to finish shopping, I'm looking through the parking lot. Is there an open window someplace? Is there somebody standing around? And I'm intentional. I've got my goals, but I want to be intentional with the unintentionality situations as well. And I'll finish with this. And for me, this is profound. One of the biggest demotivators for perseverance is fear. I can honestly say to you, when I go out now, because I've gone out so much, I'm not scared like I used to. I used to be petrified. But you know what my fear is now? The fear that slows me down from time to time is the threat of harming my own reputation. Also in John chapter 12, we're told that many religious leaders believed in Jesus, but because of the Pharisees, they would not openly confess for fear that they might not be able to attend the synagogue. And they loved the praise of man more than the praise of God. In other words, they feared losing approval. I have to fight against that. So you pick the one, and maybe there's undoubtedly many others, but joy motivates me, the promise that I've made, opposing Satan directly, looking for a person of peace, achieving rewards, saturating my geographical area. But the one that resonates with me more than anything else, I want to make God look good.
Jim, thank you so much for sharing your heart with us. I've always wanted to be a person that the closer someone gets to me, the more, not more attractive, but more, people feel like they look like Jesus. And Jim, you're sure that in my life, and you live that way. And I love as you peeled back the motivation of why you are who you are. Man, it makes me want to go. I want to get on a prayer retreat and probably steal all of yours, but come up with what's my motivation as I'm going out. And obviously the ones you shared are the core. That's so good. Thank you so much. Hey, before we go to groups, I also wanted to have another friend, Daniel Towner, who's on the call, and he's on another coaching group. But this is a plug for two things. One is for the Thursday prayer. We become friends through praying together on Thursdays. And we became closer friends last year in Lubbock as we got to talk more. And so we've just been connected this past year. And I've just been inspired by him as well, of just his consistency of going and talking to people that don't know Jesus. And I asked Daniel just to share a little bit as well and some stories. And then I'm going to lead us in one last thing and we'll break to groups. Daniel, hey, Daniel's from Philadelphia. And man, take it away, man.
Hey, thanks, Jim. Thanks, everyone, for having me. Appreciate y'all letting me speak for a few minutes. Hopefully I can add something that's helpful and encouraging. So yeah, I've been probably doing this about 2.5 years, maybe towards 3 years. Originally started at the UPS store. Knew I wanted to do this very early on, and God just continued to open up my schedule. So I kind of started there. Now I'm a stay-at-home dad. I'm a discipleship director at our church. It's kind of a legacy church, small church plant, and praise God, the pastor at the church pretty much lets me do whatever I want with disciple making. So I try to just live it out. But so there's a couple things just in general that I've learned in my short amount of time, and I know some on this call have been doing it a lot longer than me, and maybe some are just starting out. But just kind of going out consistently, prioritizing it, not giving up. one of the first things is if it's important to you, you'll make time for it. If it's not, you won't. So whatever you have to do in your life, your schedule, you have to change it around. Our family, we raise support in the disciple making ministry, and God basically told me to leave work when I intended to work there a lot longer, and He gave me time to do this. So you need time to do this. You need time to actually go out. If you don't have time, you can't do this. I know that sounds probably pretty obvious, but it's just, I think it's one of the most important things. You got to have time to do this. Um, Another thing, second thing is, as I was going out, and I'll talk about this neighborhood in a second, you know, and I think Jim was mentioning this, the other Jim. Be prayerful about where you're going. Does God want you to go to this place? Is He preparing this place? Or is He about to visit this place? Is He Himself about to go there? Or do you want to go there yourself because you think it's a cool neighborhood to go to because it's, dangerous, or, hey, look what I'm doing. Some of that, I only say that because some of that I think I had to work through with the Lord. I was in an area for 2 years, Strawberry Mansion. The name sounds nice, but I can promise you it's anything but that. And, I was trying to do all these things, A, B, C, D, praying for people, sharing stories, groups would start. I was there for 2 years, but we saw little fruit. We didn't, all these groups that started, every single one stopped. It wasn't built around a person of peace. I would say there were more or less Bible studies that Christians gathered, but they weren't built around a person of peace. So, I say that to say, my pastor asked me originally to walk this area, and that's why I started walking in Strawberry Mansion. And there was another area in my mind that we went to about 3 years ago, but this was before discipleship. We did a service project there. It was a Fifth Sunday serve at our church. Every Fifth Sunday we go out and do something for the community. And it wasn't too far from us. We were handing out meals in the middle of an ice storm. And I remember leaving that day, and God said, and this was really before discipleship, anything. He said, "Don't forget about this area." And I said, "Okay." And that was about 3 years ago. So I was in Strawberry Mansion for 2 years. I'll pick back up on that in a second. All right, the third thing, why are you doing this? Why are you doing this? Why are you going out among the lost? Is it about you, or is it about God? This isn't, what something I've learned. This isn't about what I can do or what we can do when we go out among the lost. It's about what God, is teaching us as we go out, and He teaches us about Himself too. And that was a big thing for me, because you do all these things and you're like, okay, these things are going to happen. And for me, there was just a struggle with like, hey, wow, look what's going on. Like, I'm doing this, but God quickly reminded me. He's like, you're not doing this. This isn't about you. This is about me and what I can do. And just a verse that stuck out to me in theme of this was just John 15:2. Every branch in me that does not bear fruit, He takes away. And every branch that does bear fruit, He prunes, that it may bear more fruit. I think any of us probably that have been going out among the lost, He's going to prune us. Pruning is to be expected. We will be pruned. Our motivations, our intentions, why we're going out, what we want to do, if you want to see groups start, He will prune us. And my pruning period, honestly, was Strawberry Mansion for 2 years. It was, I mean, I had moments. I'm a really pretty encouraged, spiritually kind of uplifting person, and I rarely get, depressed or anything like that. I had some doubt and discouragement of, what's going on? Why am I here? And then God, God told me, with Germantown, He kept putting it in my mind. I think another indicator of an area perhaps that God wants you to go, or He's preparing, or He's about to go, is it's just in your mind. You cannot shake the area. And I couldn't drop this area, Germantown. I said, all right, Lord, I'm going to go back. I don't know why, but I will go back. And I went back there, And I would say within a week tops, he showed me a person by the name of Doug, an insider, a believer, has more connections than I've met to date. I never met a connection like that in Strawberry Mansion. And immediately, and here's the thing about it too, for me, my personality, I think it's easy to compare when we do these things. Like, okay, if I prayer walk for hours and hours and hours and talk to a bunch of people, which is very likely to happen, I'm going to find, whoever it is, maybe a person of peace or, this insider. When I went to Germantown, I prayer walked a little bit, but I felt the Lord told me to just go there and pray. Just stay there and pray, sit in the car. And, it was one day I was driving into the area. He's like, why don't you call this place that you met when you were first walking? And I called, and lo and behold, Doug answered the phone. And immediately we were talking. He goes, where are you at? I said, I'm actually in front of CDC, Community Development Corporation. He said, I'll meet you there in 3 minutes. And from that time, our relationship has just really blossomed, And God is doing something where I'm at now. And I haven't had this feeling before because, like I said, I was in a neighborhood for 2 years, and we saw groups start, we saw miracles, we saw multiple miracles, healings on people, people being reconnected with family members that they haven't seen in 6, 8, 10 years. But just, there were always dead ends. Groups wouldn't start. They said they would, then they back off, or there'd be shootings in the area, in the projects. They call us and say, don't come today, maybe wait a day or two. All these things were happening, just dead end after dead end. And I think God just reminded me of just how much he's in charge and how much I have little to nothing to do with this. Because, I immediately met Doug when I went back to this area in Germantown, very specific crossroad too. I went there, and, God's doing something special, where he's trying to rebuild kind of a community center there. So the implications of this for the kingdom and the peace it's going to bring are going to, I think, be pretty profound. Something that's hard for me as a person, just my personality, my compassion. We have to be willing to move on from an area. If there's no fruit, or you sense God telling you to go somewhere else, we got to be willing to move on from an area. And that was really hard for me because, any of us that spend time in the neighborhoods, you get close with these people. I mean, you're not just kind of randomly talking to them and you don't talk to them again. You develop relationships with these people. And that was hard for me. But even in my compassion, God's like, don't be distracted by what I'm doing. What about, this area over here? So, and I was willing to move on, and I thank God for it. And a lot of this started, another thing is, I don't know if it was a fear, but, I think I was so literal with Luke 10. I'm like, okay, I don't have a second person. I can't go out. and God, I think, quickly met me where I was. He said, Dan, are you gonna not go out because somebody's not with you? Or are you gonna go out because I'm asking you to go out? So I went out in this neighborhood, Germantown. A lot of this, I've been by myself often during the day because a lot of the team members, they're all working during the day, and our schedules have just changed dramatically. So I would just say, I think Jim, the other Jim, was talking about it. Just go out in boldness. God will do anything he wants with your obedience. Whether you have a person or you don't have a person, whether you walk an area 40 hours, whether you just start walking there, God will do something through your obedience and your faithfulness. And I mean, that's just what I'm learning now. So those are kind of quick takeaways for me. So
cool. Daniel, thank you so much, man. That's very helpful. Hey, we're going to break into groups. I want to just put one thought in your brain from this week that Jim and Daniel both, spoke about this. It's just this idea of keeping the end in mind. I love this. Jim shared this idea of, man, on average, once a day talking to somebody, and how cool that is to look back and go, man, over this time, God's done this. I was talking to a guy who had 2 adult kids who were walking with Jesus really strong. And anytime I find someone like that, I go, hey, what's the secret? And he shared a couple things, but he said, well, when they were both babies, I decided I was going to fast every Wednesday for my kids. So I've done that the last 28 years. Oh man, right? It's like, oh, that's like, so here's my question. What do you want to, if you were, let's just take 5 years, look back 5 years from now and say, man, this is what I've done the last 5 years. What would that be? I heard Andy Stanley one time say, I never miss a Sabbath. I take the Sabbath and he can say that last 20 years. What would that be for you? And it could be connected to a lot of different things, but with disciple making. And then just live that out. But so maybe that might be a good first question as you break into our groups here is, hey, as you think about this, what does God put on you that you would consistently, that you could look back 5 years from now and say, hey, this is just a part of who I am. This is what I do. And then come up with a plan to actually do that.